Good morning, everybody. Welcome. Thank you for finding our special location this week. There's a massive farming conference on campus today, and so we are in actually a building that I'm very comfortable with, which is the music building and Thorley Recital Hall. So thanks so much for joining us. Most of you know, I'm Lynn Bartown, the director of the A.P.E.X series and also a music faculty member, and I am so thrilled to have you all here today. I bet you're getting close to ready for spring break. I am too, and I'm just so happy to have this great event as a send-off into our holiday. Looking after the break for a moment, just at a couple of our upcoming events. During the week we return from spring break, there's no official A.P.E.X event. That week is Founders Week on campus, so there are so many other activities that are available to you. We will be posting a couple of talks that are available that you can absolutely go to. They're not required for the convo class or anything, but if you need extra points, they're both possibilities. There's a talk on Tuesday and on Thursday, and you can just look at our social media for details. Also, I wanted to let you know that Jen will be available in the lobby after the talk today if you want to get a chance to meet her. We also have 3 of her books for sale, and so if you're interested in reading more about some of the topics today, please feel free to check those out. All right, let's hear a little bit about Jen. Jen Marlowe is an award-winning author and documentary filmmaker and playwright and human rights activist. She began working in children's theater using the dramatic arts as a platform for students to tell their stories. She has lived and worked in Jerusalem, Afghanistan, Cyprus, India, Pakistan, and Bosnia, drawing on her work with the theater to engage in dialogue-based conflict resolution. In 2004, she traveled to northern Darfur and eastern Chad to make the award-winning documentary film Darfur Diaries, Messages from Home, and wrote the accompanying book, which we have for sale here, Darfur Diaries, Stories of Survival. Her second feature-length documentary, Rebuilding Hope, follows 3 Sudanese-American young men on their first homecoming trip back to Sudan. She has also created the documentary One Family in Gaza, a film that profiles one family's experience during and after the 2009 assault on the Gaza Strip. In addition to writing Darfur Diaries, Jen has also co-authored The Hour of Sunlight, One Palestinian's Journey from Prisoner to Peacemaker, with Sami Al-Jundi, which was the winner of the London-based Middle East Monitor's Palestine Book Award in 2012. Her most recent book, which I'm sure you'll hear about all of these today, is I Am Troy Davis, written with Martina Davis Correa, the sister of the innocent death row prisoner Troy Davis, whose execution in 2011 stirred worldwide protest and condemnation due to his strong case of innocence. Jen has been the recipient of grants, residencies, and fellowships from the Pulitzer Center on Crisis Reporting, the National Institute Investigative Fund, the DeRote Foundation, Seattle's Office of Arts and Cultural Affairs, Hedgebrook, and the Rachel Corrie Foundation for Peace and Justice. She is a modern-day warrior who brings to light the stories of individuals and families. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Jen Marlowe.
Yeah, I'll just hold that.
Thanks so much. Oh my gosh.
Having me here. Hey. Never had music accompany me up to the stage before. It is really wonderful to be here. Thank you, Lynn and A.P.E.X. And Matthew Eddy, who Matthew's and my films were in the same festival in Chicago last year, which is kind of how the wheels got put into motion for me to have the opportunity to be here today. And it's really just a pleasure to get to be with all of you. So thank all of you for coming, and I look forward to us having the opportunity to talk together. I want to start just with looking at the quote that is in front of you, which is something that an activist and an actor that I admire for his activism, Danny Glover, said, I try to find hope in struggle and resistance in small places as much as I can. And today I want to share with you 3 stories of resistance and struggle that have given me a lot of hope. And the resistance that you're going to hear about may not look like what we're used to thinking of resistance as being. And you heard a little bit about my bio. I've spent time living and working in conflict areas. I've seen and been around and witnessed armed resistance, I've seen and witnessed and been around direct action nonviolent resistance, and I've participated in direct action, in nonviolent direct action resistance, and I respect and admire that form of resistance very much. But the stories that I want to tell you about today are actually a little bit different from all of those forms of resistance. What you're looking at here is a drawing that was made by a 9-year-old little boy named Ibrahim, who my colleagues Aisha and Adam and I met in Iridimi refugee camp in eastern Chad. Eastern Chad borders on the Darfur region of Sudan. Darfur is the western region of Sudan, and at the time that we met Ibrahim, which was in October 2004, he had fled from the massive violence that was taking place in Darfur, where the Sudanese government was basically launching a counterinsurgency campaign in which not only the rebels, not only the folks who had started the rebellion were being targeted, but their entire villages and their entire communities. And there was a policy of a scorched earth campaign of villages being burned down to the ground. Hundreds of thousands of refugees poured over the border into Chad. Millions more folks were internally displaced in Darfur, and thousands, tens of thousands of people were killed. And starting in 2000, this began in 2003. And when we met Ibrahim in 2004, we were interviewing refugees in the refugee camp in Chad, right near the border with Darfur. And the kids all came up and they were like, we want to be interviewed, interview us. And so we're like, sure. But then as soon as we turned on the cameras, they just shut down. The trauma was so profound that they had experienced that even though they were all enthusiastic about the idea of being interviewed, they were not able to talk about what they had been through and what they had witnessed and experienced. But then we discovered the drawings in their notebooks. And Ibrahim was showing us the drawing of, and at first he just said that, that was his village. Above, that was a picture of an Antonov Russian-made bomber plane that the Sudanese government was flying and bombing his village. And when we asked him, where was your house in that village, he pointed to the house with the flames coming from the roof, and he said, that was my house. My parents and my brother were killed, and I managed to escape. Not long after meeting Ibrahim and seeing his drawing and him telling us what happened through his drawing, we were able to go across the border into Darfur, which we had to do with the help of the rebel group because the Sudanese government wasn't about to give visas to independent documentary filmmakers who were trying to document the atrocities that they were perpetrating. And we went to a village very close to the village where Ibrahim had fled from. And the Umda, which is somewhat like the mayor of the village, was taking us around. And I'm going to show a brief film clip where you can see him taking us around and showing us the remnants of the destruction. And as you'll see in the clip, as he's taking us around, something appeared in the sky which hadn't been there for many months. It had been months and months since the villages in that area had gotten bombed. And in fact, when we were in Darfur, there was ongoing peace negotiations happening between the government and the rebel group. And the folks in the villages were beginning to think that maybe the campaign of terror that they had been living under was now subsiding. But while we were in the middle of the tour looking at the results of these bombing campaigns, an Antonov flew overhead. So I'm going to give you a chance just to watch about a 3-minute clip that shows that.
بعدين شي سكو كي علي شي يا كما كي شي عمر بشير جيش شي الجيش كنا جيش عمر بشير كيلو جانجو تو بشو كا اوكل كده سوا اللي تارا اوكل تارا تدرو له كما كا اوكل تبشير اوكل ولا كده كده بس كويل بيشي بكنا يا اوكل دي بس كنت يوزو كوره كده على هذا كده ما دبو كي هيرلي كي اويدا كي سرو كده سر بيتار جي سر كيلو جي كترك أنا كيا سكودا أنا كيا ساتي كيلو أقول كيدا سمون كبري تحري تور تحري كيدا أنا كي سكوشي أنا كيلي برميلة تي قدر برميلة تي بوب كتير سكوا على كده ولا بيا كبرت ولا هو كبرت وبعدين كيو كرايك تولي شي سكو تريشي سكو هي طبعا كيو في عندنا مثلا سامين صوت عندنا وجيرو أبو بيالك هيك أبو بيالك ويا لكو بيا أسر بدو هذا
واليوم كمان فات اليوم هسه جانا هنا 3 مرة ولا حسب مرتين ما نعرف جي كله بدور زي ده
Jakur tayar kiti hirde tar ko mara pura ra kuri kire ni kurdi la yani ariska korda ke bir beti de doga beti ta durta kure beti re sera taka arisar salam kire halede din
bari tagi dikliga uruni tigi tombo habar keji bari tagi bagi tuwaro bari bagi digi be yogle kyara tren tanani kinyangudu
So in that clip, you had the chance to see us being taken around the village. You had the chance to see the Antonov flying overhead. And you also had the chance to see a little bit of something extraordinary that we experienced that same night, which was a wedding in the village. There was a wedding that was happening, and Adam and Aisha and I were invited, really kind of made the guests of honor at this wedding. And you just got to see a few moments of the celebration, which took place outside. The entire village had essentially been burned down. So there was like a little compound, maybe the one compound that hadn't been totally burned to the ground. Everyone was just sitting outside. There was no electricity, so it was in the dark. There was no food. There was a couple like hard candies that were being passed around. But what you got a chance to see a few moments of were people dancing and singing and celebrating and clapping. And I remember that night, the night before we got to that village, we had actually been up almost all night. The truck we were riding on through the desert with the rebels had broken down, and we were up all night as they were trying to get it fixed. So by the time the wedding came around the next evening, I was like so exhausted I could barely stand up. But my colleagues, Adam and Aisha, jumped right into the jumping and the dancing and the chanting and the singing. And Adam and Aisha didn't speak any Zagawa, which was we were in the Zagawa region of Darfur, so they weren't able to join in the singing, but they were joining in the celebration. And I was kind of hanging back to the side, watching, and just found myself almost being mesmerized, almost in a trance by the beauty of the sight and the beauty of the sounds, watching the singing and the dancing and the celebrating and the clapping. But I didn't have the strength at that moment to be able to actually join in and participate the way my colleagues had. Another story that I want to share with you have to do with my friends Martina, or to her close friends and family known as Tina and Troy. This is Tina and Troy as tiny little ones. It was a photo taken on an Easter Sunday. Troy was about 1.5 years, and Tina would have been around 3. Martina and Troy were, although they were about 1.5 years apart, 17 months apart to be precise, lots of times they were so close that people often thought they were twins, assumed they were twins as they were growing up, but they called themselves T and T for Tina and Troy. They were so close that they often could finish each other's sentences and read each other's thoughts. This is Martina and Troy, T and T, several decades after that first picture you saw, when Martina was visiting her innocent brother on Georgia's death row. in the midst of her struggle to try to prove his innocence, to try to save his life. I believe this picture was taken around 2007, 2008, somewhere in that range. I first got to know about Martina and Troy, and I first got to know about their struggle because Troy survived 3 attempts that the state of Georgia made to kill him. The first such attempt was in the summer, it was in June 2007, and less than 24 hours before the scheduled time that Georgia intended to kill Troy, that execution was called off by the Georgia Board of Pardons and Parole, 23 hours before the scheduled time of execution. And the next day, Martina spoke about her brother's case on a show that I listen to regularly called Democracy Now! And I was so taken by Martina. Here was this woman who was clearly, even over this one radio or TV interview, it was so clear that this woman was a force of nature. And I was so struck by her. She was talking about her efforts to save her brother's life. She was talking about the details in his case. And she was also talking about her own struggle for her own life. Martina had been diagnosed with breast cancer in 2001. At the time that she was diagnosed, she was given 6 months to live. At that time, she was the single mother of a 6-year-old boy with a brother on death row whose innocence she was fighting to prove. And prognosis or no prognosis, Martina decided, and she told the story in this interview on Democracy Now!, that dying in 6 months really just wasn't an option. She had her son to raise, and she had her brother to free from death row. And I was so taken by Martina that it made me want to look into Troy's story. And I began to do some internet research. I hadn't heard anything about Troy. I didn't know a lot about the death penalty. I knew in a very kind of vague way that I was against the death penalty. I thought it was a brutal system, but I didn't know, I wouldn't have been able to even very articulately talk about why I was against the death penalty. And I started doing research into Troy's case. At that time, the research that I found absolutely convinced me that there was an egregious travesty of justice that happened in Troy's case. At that time, I still thought that that was an exception. I didn't yet realize what I came to learn later, which was that the death penalty is the sharp edge of a very violent and damaging criminal justice system, which is part and parcel of state violence that is endemic in our country. But at that time, back in 2007, right after Troy had survived his first execution date, I didn't know any of that. I just knew that I wanted to try to reach out to Troy after reading about his case, wrote him a letter in prison, he wrote back, we started corresponding, which led to me partnering with Troy and with Martina to write their family struggle, their family story, which led to me coming to Savannah to get to know the family and to start working on the book and to visit Troy on death row in Georgia. I want to show you another video. Let me make sure that is the next slide. Yes, it is. Which gives a little bit of the details of Troy's case. It's about 7 minutes, and it's a video that I made. Martina took me through the scene of the murder that happened that Troy was convicted for. Troy was convicted for the murder of a white police officer in Savannah, Georgia in 1989 named Mark McPhail. So Martina took me through and walked me through what happened, and you'll get a chance to see on display bits and pieces of the evidence that should have exonerated Troy.
When you really look at it and you tell what happened, you have a better realization of the impossibility of even identifying a shooter, any shooter.
20 years ago this summer, Savannah police officer Mark McPhail was working an off-duty job here. He was providing security at night for this bus station and for this Burger King restaurant that is currently out of business. There was a homeless man in this parking lot who was being harassed and intimidated. He yelled for help. The officer ran over, and seconds later, Officer Mark McPhail was shot and killed. It was tragic, horrifying, and chaotic. And 2 decades later, it all still is.
Oh, Savannah, shots ring through the night. A man lies pistol whipped in the corner. A cop crumbles in the streaking light. Now we molly hocking over the haystack now. See me swimming with a bullet out. Detective man, he do what he got to do. when a black man shoot a white man down. No, they want retribution.
This was the pool hall called Charlie Brown's. Troy them would have been playing pool right there. Larry Young, when he came from the Greyhound bus station, he went to that convenience store to go get his beer. When he came back up the sidewalk, that's when he encountered Sylvester Coles in front of the pool hall. And Sylvester Coles was asking him for a can of beer and he refused. And so what happened was Larry Young kept walking really fast and he was walking up through the SunTrust and then Coles starts following him. Troy them came through here and Sylvester Coles and Larry Young were already in the middle of the parking lot and they were still arguing.
The man who admitted to harassing the homeless person went to police the next day and told them he saw Troy Davis shoot the officer. Wanted posters went up all over Savannah. A reward offered to catch the so-called dangerous cop killer. Racial tensions inflamed.
The police officer came running from behind here, McPhail, and came running into the parking lot. And apparently Troy them had already taken off. Troy said that when they heard shots, they were already at the fence back over there. She said she heard the shots, right? And then she came out of her room and ran to the edge of the stairs. And then she saw Troy stand over the body with a smirky smile. This is approximately the area where it took place, right here. So, but it would have been at nighttime, so it would have been a lot darker, but still, I don't think you could see my face that clear from where you are. Well, she identified Troy's face from there. How are you supposed to see a black man with a smirky smile at 12:30, 1 o'clock in the morning? Once they had, Sylvester Coles said Troy Davis, and he lived in Cloverdale. It was only one Troy that lived in Cloverdale at that time. Then what they try to do is they start going to people's houses, rounding up, say, who know Troy, who know Troy, who know Troy.
Almost all of the prosecution's star witnesses have changed their stories. Some saying police pressured them to say Troy Davis did it.
Didi was 16. They went to his house and took him out of his house with like 20 police officers with no parents and no lawyers, interrogated him for 7 hours.
Darrell Collins is one of the prosecution witnesses who signed a police statement implicating Troy Davis.
And I told them over and over that I didn't see this happen. They put what they wanted to put in that statement.
He said, I kept telling them Troy didn't do it, and they put in that statement what they wanted to put in there and told me they would charge me with accessory to murder unless I signed the statement.
Jumping Josephine, where you gonna turn? The system has done failed you.
I don't expect people to walk around and say, oh, Troy Davis is innocent. I expect people to say, you're supposed to be convicted, you know, beyond a reasonable doubt.
He was definitely guilty. All of the witnesses, they were able to, you know, to ID him as the person who actually did it.
The primary reason he was convicted, the witness testimony. The slain police officer's wife agrees.
They were just so adamant about what they saw, when they saw it.
But this is how the juror feels now.
If I knew then what I know now, Troy Davis would not be on death row. The verdict would be not guilty.
They'll round up all the witnesses and suspects and accuse them of lesser crimes. Now we molly hocking over the haystack now. See me swimming with the doe-legged out. And the policeman he knew what he got to do. When a black man shoot a white man down. City went on, this is a trial that should not be the court.
So I made that video in the spring or early summer of 2011 in the effort that we were making to try to prevent Georgia's attempt to execute Troy. And you got a chance to see in the video not only, I believe, some of the evidence that points to Troy's innocence, but you got a chance to see a little bit of Martina and her fight and her fire and her determination to do whatever she could to save her brother and to prove his innocence. I had the absolute honor and privilege in my life not only to grow close to Troy, but to grow close to Troy's whole family. And what you're seeing, and to learn so many of the family stories and to be able to partner with Troy and with Martina to tell those stories. The photos that you're seeing right now, the photo on your left, my right, is the first time that Troy met Martina's 6-week-old baby, Dejan. I spoke earlier about when Martina was diagnosed with cancer in 2001, that she was the single mom of a then 6-year-old boy, but this is Dejan before that. And both Martina and Troy separately told me the story of the very first time that Troy had the chance to meet his little nephew. Dejan was a preemie. He was born, I forget how many weeks premature now, but significantly, and he was really, really tiny. But as soon as he was allowed out of the hospital, as soon as it was safe for him to be able to travel, the first place that Martina brought him was to Jackson, Georgia, where Georgia houses its death row prisoners, to meet his uncle Troy. And Martina and Troy have both told me the story of how Martina, wanted, Troy, come hold your baby nephew. And Troy was scared to hold that tiny baby. The baby was so little and fragile. Troy was afraid that just the pressure of his big hands, supporting this little guy would somehow bruise or hurt him. And Martina was having none of that. She put the baby in Troy's arms, and Troy's like, Tina, take him, he's so little, I don't know how to hold a baby, take him. Martina walked away. She's like, no, you take him, you hold him. Walked away and leaned against the wall and forced her brother to figure out how to support a little infant's head and how to hold him and how to bond with him. And as Tina told me the story, she said, it's as if I'd given my brother a gold bar. Was how precious that interaction was. And that was the start. That moment you're looking there was the start of Troy really co-raising Dejan with Martina. Troy was Dejan's father figure, and then you can see the next photo when Dejan's just a little bit older. And Troy was the one who he would call Dejan several times a week and had written on his calendar every single one of Dejan's tests that he had, and would study with Dejan over the phone and make sure that Dejan was prepared for those tests. And somehow through barbed wire and cinder blocks and physical separation, Troy made sure that he was a regular, steady part of Dejan's life. And really co-raised Dejan with Martina. Martina in and out of the hospital, fighting her cancer, and Troy from death row. Hopefully we'll get the next slide up here. Oh, there we go. This is Dejan in fall of 2011 with his little cousin Kirsten. Kirsten is Troy and Martina's youngest sister's daughter. And Kirsten didn't get to have the same experience that Dejan did of getting to know her uncle Troy. Kirsten was 3 years old, had just turned 3 years old in 2011. And in 2010, Georgia had taken away contact visits. What that means is that Troy had been able, as Dejan was little, had been able to bounce his little nephew on his knee. As Dejan got a little older than that, Troy had been able to, wrestle with him and play with him in the visitor parking room. They would take you can't bring anything with you when you visit people on death row, but you're able to have snacks from the vending machine. So Troy would take the Coke can, wrap it in a Fritos bag, make it into a little impromptu football, and play catch with Dejan in the visiting room of death row. Kirsten couldn't have any of that because there was a glass wall that separated her from Troy. So how do you develop a relationship with a toddler when you can't touch that toddler, when you can't hold them, when you can't cuddle with them? But Troy and Kirsten developed their own ritual where Troy would put his hand, at the end of every visit when they were leaving, Troy would put his hand on the glass barrier, or the plexiglass barrier that was separating him from his family. And then, so he would raise his hand like that, and then Kirsten would raise her hand up and put it inside Troy's handprint. So not letting, Troy had already learned how not to let the barbed wire and cinder concrete blocks separate him from his family. Now he was learning how to resist the additional separation of not allowing them contact visit, and making sure that he and his niece developed a special ritual of being able to be hand to hand at the end of each visitation. And then Troy would send letters to Kirsten. He would trace his handprint and send that to Kirsten and tell her to put her hand inside the traced image of his handprint so that they could still have that special ritual even when they weren't able to be together at the prison in Jackson, Georgia. The third story that I want to share with you today is about the Awaja family, the family that you're seeing on the screen right now. I met the Awaja family in 2009, in the summer of 2009 in Gaza Strip, right on the site, right next to the site of their home, which had been destroyed in the 2009 assault on the Gaza Strip by the Israeli army. And they told me the story of their home being destroyed. They told me the story of their 9-year-old son, Ibrahim, being shot and killed by the Israeli army as his father was carrying him, trying to bring him to safety. They told me the story about how the whole family, the whole night before Ibrahim was killed, had huddled under an olive tree next to their home that they called Ibrahim's olive tree because it had been planted for Ibrahim when he had been born. So it was considered Ibrahim's olive tree. When I met the family, I had my camera with me. I hadn't been planning to make a film, I didn't go to Gaza to make a film, but I brought my video camera because I knew how difficult it is for internationals to have access to Gaza, and I wanted to be prepared because I'd gotten access, I'd gotten the ability to go in, which was so rare, and I wanted to be able to document that which I might find. And I spent 3 days with the Awaja family, sleeping with them in the tent, which they then lived in after their home had been destroyed, filming their story, filming the kids, and came back with a couple hours, several hours of footage. But I might never have actually made the film, except for that I couldn't get this image out of my mind. And what you're looking at in this picture is 3-year-old Dia and 5-year-old Hala. That's their home that had been destroyed. It's hard to tell in this photograph, but that's the roof of their home that had collapsed in over their home when bulldozers pushed the walls out. Their only playground was the rubble of their destroyed home. And what Hala's doing up there, she's rolling bullet casings and shrapnels down the slanted roof of the home. So their only toys were the weapons of war that were used to murder their brother, and their only playground was the roof, the collapsed roof of their destroyed home. And I want to show you one final video clip, which is the second half of the film that I made with the family, one family in Gaza. The first half of the film is the family talking about exactly what they lived through that night, and you just heard some of the most important elements of that, of their home being destroyed and then 9-year-old Ibrahim being murdered and in full sight of his brothers and sisters in his father's arms. The second half of the film is the father, Kamal, really talking about how he's trying to help his children overcome the trauma of that experience. And that's the part I want to share with you now. It's about 9 minutes.
إنه دمر البيت، دمر كل شيء، بس ما خليت أنا أي شيء يدمر العائلة، يدمر البنية التربوية اللي ربيتها لأولادي. فأصعب نقطة عندي يعني كيف أنا أوفر الأمن والأمان لأبنائي مع الحفاظ على مستواهم التعليمي، على مستواهم الاجتماعي، على صحتهم النفسية. اختلفت سلوكياتهم مش زي ما كانوا في البداية.
احنا أثرت كتير علينا. أول حاجة في الدراسة احنا علينا الكبار، والصغار أثرت عليهم إنهم يعني أخذوا ذكريات لحتى الآن بتنام على الرمل، لأنها أول ليلة إحنا بتنام في السور في الرمل، لحتى الآن بتنام ماما بتنقلها من الرمل على الفراش.
أكل الولد هذا صارت معه عقدة بعد الحرب، دير بالك، وأيام الحرب صار يمسك الرغيف يحضنه في حضنه، ما ينامش إلا والخبز في إيده، وهو نايم اسحب الخبز ورايح في النوم منه يصحى. هذا إلي ويحضن الرغيف يضله حاضنه زي هيك، هذا إلي.
من الأشياء اللي أنت كنت ما تقدر تزيلها ولليوم ما بتقدر تزيلها لحتى الآن، اللي هو أنك تزيل الخوف من الأطفال، من عينيهم، من تصرفاتهم، من أحاسيسهم. ما بتقدرش تشيل شعور الجوع من جوا الطفل. كيف بدك أنت غير أنك تطعميه عشان يبطل الجوع؟ لكن ممكن، لكن الخوف كيف أنا بدي أعمل له إياه الآن في اللحظة هذه.
يعني الأولاد طب أنت إيش بدك تسوي فيهم الحين هذول؟
بدي أحطهم في الخيمة.
وين تحطيهم في الخيمة؟ إيش بدك تسوي فيهم في الخيمة؟ مين اللي رمى عليها؟ الله يسامحك يا ضياء، مش لاقي غير شظية ترمي عليها؟
هذه الأشياء اللي أنت مش قادر تعالجها ولا أنا بقدر أعالجها أو إني أزيلها. ليش؟ ارتبطت في الذاكرة بالنسبة له، ما هواش حلم عابر. أصبحت اليوم بشوف جرافة يعني بدها تهد بيت، طيارة بدها تطخ، جندي عربي يهودي أي جندي يعني بالنسبة له بده يقتله.
شبشب بدها تطلع.
لا اضرب. ايوه وصح حلوه. الله يعني بحاول جاهد اني ابعده عن العنف، لكن هو الحدث اللي صار معه اجبره انه يفرغ حتى الخوف اللي عنده بالعنف. حتى في القبله لما ببوسك ضياء بتحس انه في عنده عنف في قبلته الك، يعني ممكن يقبلك ويحدفك هيك عادي، يخبطك بوكس يخبطك. ضد أنا العنف، ضد الحروب بأي شكل من الأشكال، لكن أنا بدعو لهيك وهيك يعني أملي يعني في الحياة، وبربي أولادي على هيك، على الحياة وعلى السلام وعلى الأمور العنف. طبعا أنا بحاول إن أبعد أولادي عن العنف وأنسيهم الأشياء اللي صارت، لكن ما بقدر أمحى من الذاكرة اللي هو يعني أثار الخوف، يعني الذاكرة انحفرت عنده بالدم.
سيارة تخبط
لدرجة انه يعني لما استشهد ابراهيم وعملت له صورة البوستر هذا، في يعني فكروا انه يعملوا له يعني شفت بعض التصاميم تحط له هنا راية وبحمله سلاح وبسريش لطفل زي هذا. ابراهيم عمره ما كان عنيف، عمره ما كان تبع حب سلاح او دائما مبتسم، يعني بحب له الابتسامة. فما حبيتش يكون أي نوع من أنواع العنف أو السلاح أو حتى التميز التنظيمي للبوستر تبعه فتح أو حماس. عملت له إياه بين نجوم، أطفال، مستقبل، الحياة، الأمل، يعني مبتسم.
شو رسالتك؟
إسرائيلي يعني سؤالك صعب كتير إني أنا أجاوبك عليه، ولكن يمكن تستغرب كمان من إجابتي. برغم إنه إسرائيلي ويهودي وقتل ابني وكل حاجة، بقول يعني بتمناش إنه أعيش اللحظات اللي أنا عشتها، إنه ابنه ينعدم بين إيديه، يحس إنه ابنه مش مات، ابنه مات بين إيديه، ابنه مش قادر يعمل له حاجة، حتى ينظر فيه مش قادر ينظر له خوفا من السلاح اللي موجه له. المرار اللي جوا قلبي والحسرة اللي أنا عايشها على ابني مش حابب بني آدم يعيش عليها، كان إسرائيلي ولا عربي. اتدمر بيتي، اتدمرت حياتي، اتدمر، بس ما دمر جواتي، ما قتلني أنا ككمال، ما قتلنا كأسرة، احنا عايشين. فبالتالي لازم نعيش حياتنا ونستمر. بزرع ورد لأبنائي، بزرع مظبوط، مش اللي هو بده إياه أو اللي كان فيه، ولكن نوعا ما بعوضه شيء اللي بقدر عليه.
طب هات ايدك عشان تطلع، تعال هات ايدك. لا
أنا عامل له جنينة هنا كلها نعنع وريحان، لأنه في الحلم أجا زار أمه ووقف معها عند الجنينة. فبما أنه أجا فيها يعني اهتميت إنها خلاص بسقيها نعناع وريحان وإشي. هاي إبراهيم بتسكروا فيها يعني، الله يرحمه. بطلبش من واحد يجي أقول له لله ابني لي بيت عشان أسكن فيه أنا، أو لأنه مش هذه هي المساعدة اللي إحنا بدنا إياها. بدنا مساعدة يعني اللي ترفع في قيمتك كإنسان، تحسسك إنك أنت رجل، زوجتك امرأة، ابنك طفل. فكيف السؤال هذا؟ كيف أنا ممكن أبني أسرة خالية من العنف؟ إذا حدا عنده إجابة وعندك إجابة لسؤالي كيف أبنيه، مد إيدك لي وساعدني في الحل بس.
Towards the end of the video, you hear Kamal saying, really kind of impeaching or imploring, I'm not looking for charity. The kind of help we need is not charity. The kind of help we need is to raise our value as human beings. And if you could encapsulate in one word, if there's one word that can represent that, I would say that word is dignity. Seeking to have the ability to lead a life of dignity for himself and for his family and for his children. And watching Kamal as a parent, and you got a chance to hear him talk a little bit about how he was trying to parent his children, I felt like I was watching a family. I was watching Kamal and Wafa, both of them. I was watching them in circumstances that was seeking and striving to strip them, not only of their home and killing their son, but was intentionally seeking to strip them of their humanity and their dignity. They were responding by insisting on the very thing that was being sought to be stripped from them. They were responding by insisting on dignity and insisting on living lives of humanity and insisting on creating hope for their children. And that was an absolutely extraordinary thing to witness. And it goes back to the first story that I talked to you about the wedding in Darfur. And I was talking to you about how I was at the wedding with Adam and Aisha were jumping in with the singing and the dancing and the clapping and the chanting, and I hadn't had the energy to, and I was like practically falling asleep as I was watching the celebration. But then later that night, we were sleeping under the stars, sleeping just in our sleeping bags, and then all of a sudden I got my second wind and I couldn't go to sleep, and I couldn't get that wedding out of my mind. I couldn't get the images of the dancing and the singing and the chanting out of my mind, and I realized what the singing, what I was hearing with the singing. And like I said, I don't understand Zagawa. I don't know the literal translation of the songs I was hearing, but I understood at that moment, as I was lying in my sleeping bag hours later, I understood the subtext of the singing. The subtext of the singing was a message to the Sudanese government, in which the people in this village in Darfur were saying to the Sudanese government, you will not destroy us. You will not erase us. We are going to continue to get married, to celebrate, to experience joy, to have children. Even in the shadow of the Antonov bombing plane that flew overhead that very day, we are still going to celebrate. We are still going to live. And when I realized that that was what the message was of the singing and the chanting and the singing, I really regretted that I hadn't somehow found within me the energy to join in, because that is a form of resistance that I absolutely want to take part in. You saw the images both in the photo and in the film of Dia and Hala in 2009 playing on the rubble of their destroyed home. This is Dia and Hala 3 years later in 2012 as they're playing on the construction of their home, which was then being rebuilt. Kamal was so insistent on trying to provide some kind of stability for his children. It took 3 years to be able to get to the home even started to be built, but this is the beginning of that construction. The home was finally completed in January of 2014, and in February 2014, like the glass in the windows was installed. It was fully completed. In the summer of 2014, there was another massive assault on Gaza. Their home was destroyed again. You can see in these two photos the rubble of their home, now twice destroyed. Kamal told me one of the things that devastated them the most about the second destruction of the home, first of all, was any shred of being able to guarantee for the kids that they could have any feeling of safety and security was now forever gone. After the first home was destroyed, they tried to make promises that it would never happen again, and then it did. So being able to tell the kids, it'll never happen again just wasn't, any ability to feel stability as a young person was taken away from them. The other thing that devastated Kamal and Wafa was that the tree, Ibrahim's tree, the one that they had all sheltered under the night that their home was destroyed, Kamal believed was also destroyed. It was gone. It wasn't there anymore when they returned to the house and found the house destroyed. And that tree was for him the only living reminder of his son that had been killed in 2009. So that was really devastating for him. But through that devastation that Wafa and Kamal were experiencing, you're also seeing Wafa's hanging laundry on the rubble to dry of her home, continuing life, figuring out some way to continue to live. And you see Kamal kissing 3-year-old Ibrahim, who was named after his brother, never met his brother who was killed, was born after that, but was named after him. You see Kamal continuing a legacy of making sure his children are loved. And however that love might be able to shield and protect them in whatever way, he was going to make sure that they had it. These photos were taken when I went to visit them. This was about 6 months after the assault. The assault in 2014 was in the summer of 2014, so this was taken in January of 2015. Then I was back again in the summer of 2015, and they had started to clear away the rubble to try again to rebuild their home. And they discovered underneath the rubble some remnants of Ibrahim's tree, which had survived. And is continuing to grow now. And so the hope that Kamal insisted on continuing to nurture in his family and in his children, hoping against all of the forces that are trying to prevent this, hoping that his family still might thrive, he found a little physical manifestation of that in the fact that Ibrahim's tree had actually survived. This photo was taken on September 21st, 2011, at the gates to death row in Jackson, Georgia. Troy at that point had survived 3 execution dates. I talked to you about the one in 2007. In 2008, he came within 90 minutes of being killed before the US Supreme Court stayed that execution. And then the next month in 2008, he came within 3 days. The video that you saw was made in the summer of 2011, anticipating that an execution date was going to be set. It was set, and it was set for September 21st, 2011. And there was hundreds of us who came to protest that execution, hundreds of us standing with Troy's family on the prison grounds at death row in Jackson, Georgia, with a hugely militarized presence. SWAT team, SWAT helicopters. It was the most militarized protest in this country that I had seen, and this was before Ferguson. This was before a lot of the militarized repression of protests that we see today. But in 2011, this felt like something new to me in this country. This photo was taken at 7:00 p.m., which was the time that Georgia had slated for Troy to be killed. And as 7:00 approached, in the minutes before 7:00, you can see, hold on, I think this is how I get the little, yeah. This is the back of Dejan, now 17 years old. You can see Martina is sitting right there. Martina had been in the hospital the whole summer leading up to Troy's execution. Like, her health had deteriorated rapidly. And essentially, when Troy got the execution date, she essentially busted out of the hospital. I mean, they did release her, but she basically said, like, either you will release me or I'm just leaving, because George is planning to kill my brother in 2 weeks, and I am going to be there with him for that final fight to save his life. And if we're not successful in that fight, to say goodbye. And so Martina is sitting in a wheelchair, too weak to stand, too weak to walk, but there to continue to fight. And as 7 p.m. approached, everyone gathered around, and there was praying and there was singing. And then right at 7:00, there was a roar that erupted. Only about 100 of us were actually let in the prison yard. Everybody else was across the street, at a church across the street from the prison. And we heard the yell from across the street first, and then it kind of spread. It spread to inside the prison, and we heard people yelling, "Troy gotta stay, Troy gotta stay." And everyone was like, wait, did the miracle happen yet again? Is there, for the fourth time, did Troy survive George's attempt to kill him? And then there was all this confusion, and finally we understood, wait, hold on, no, it's not a stay. And we realized it wasn't a stay, it was just a delay, because the U.S. Supreme Court the lawyers had filed a last-ditch sort of 11th hour Hail Mary appeal to try to stop the execution, and the U.S. Supreme Court hadn't yet handed down their ruling. So there was a delay until we heard from the U.S. Supreme Court. So then entered this period of waiting and waiting, as 7 turned to 7:30, turned to 8, turned to 8:30, turned to 9, waiting and waiting. Was Troy going to be saved or not? And in the middle of the waiting, there was 3-year-old Kirsten with everybody in the prison yard, who, maybe had some understanding in some way of what was going on, but largely not. And you can see that's Dejan lifting his little cousin up, and you can see Kirsten, laughing and happy and delighted. There was 100 of us in that prison yard. Any of us would have been happy to take care of and to entertain Kirsten at that moment. Like, the Davis family had a lot on their mind and in their heart in that moment. They didn't need to be the ones taking care of Kirsten. But that's not who they are. They knew they had a 3-year-old child, and that child needed to feel safe and protected, and needed to play and needed to laugh. And so in that moment where they're waiting to find out, where Dejan is waiting to find out if the man who essentially he considered his father figure was going to live or going to die, he was spending that time waiting, making sure that his little 3-year-old cousin was laughing and was able to feel some joy amidst an unbelievably tense moment. At 10:30 p.m., we got the news from the U.S. Supreme Court. The appeal was denied. The state of Georgia was going to proceed to kill Troy, effective immediately. And, another grimmer phase of waiting took place, because later on, the next day, you get the news story and you learn everything that happened. You learn exactly what time Troy was taken from the holding cell next to the execution chamber and brought in, at what moment he was strapped down onto the gurney, when the 3 needles were inserted into his veins, because it was at that time Georgia was using a 3-drug cocktail to kill its prisoners. What time the time of death was, you learn all that later, but at that time, standing there in the prison yard, we didn't know any of that. All we knew was that the state of Georgia was in some part of the phase of killing Troy. And the photo you're looking at right now, this is Martina. You can see her in her wheelchair. This is Laura Moy. And Laura at that time was the death penalty abolition campaign director for Amnesty International. And what happened, I was standing with Laura as we were in this horrible waiting phase, not knowing where in the process of the killing we were at. And Martina called Laura over. She's like, Laura, come here, I need to tell you something. And Laura and I both looked at each other like, whatever Martina needs to say right now has got to be pretty important given the circumstances. And Laura came over and Martina said, I want you to meet Monica. Monica came all the way from San Francisco to be with us tonight, and she wants to get plugged in to the anti-death penalty movement. She wants to meet who the other activists are in California, and she wants to get involved in this work, because the whole time that Martina had been fighting to save Troy's work, she had also become a leader in the anti-death penalty movement, and she understood, and the whole family always understood, that the struggle was much bigger than her brother. It was never just about Troy. It was about ending the death penalty. And so you can see in this photo, Laura and Monica are exchanging contact information so that Laura can plug Monica into the anti-death penalty movement. And business done, you see Martina, the direction where Martina's looking is towards the prison itself, and you can see the agonized look on her face. And I imagine that kind of business taken care of, what Martina is wondering is, what's happening to my brother at this very moment? And because of the magic of digital photography, we know the exact moment this photo was taken. It was taken at 11:08 p.m. We learned the next day that 11:08 p.m. was Troy's time of death. That was the moment. This photo was taken at the moment that Troy succumbed to lethal injection. So what was Martina doing at the moment that the state of Georgia took her brother's life? At that very moment, she was enlisting another soldier in the fight to bring down the system that killed her brother. That kind of resistance, that kind of courage, that kind of struggle is something that inspires me every day, and especially today on International Women's Day, honoring Martina, who only lived for 2 months after Troy was killed. Martina passed away 2 months after this photo was taken as well. And so honoring that fight, that struggle, that resistance that their entire family has been carrying out after Troy and after Martina's passage, that is some of the most powerful form of resistance that I can imagine.
Yes. Say it loud. First of all, I'd like to address the McPhail's family. I'd like to let you all know that despite the situation, I know all of you still are convinced that I'm the person that killed your father, your son, and your brother. But I am innocent. The incidents that happened that night was not my fault. I did not have a gun that night. I did not shoot your family members. But I am so sorry for your loss. I really am, sincerely. All that I can ask is that each of you look deeper into this case so that you really will finally see the truth. I ask to my family and friends that you all continue to pray, that you all continue to forgive, continue to fight this fight. For those who are about to take my life, may God have mercy on all of your souls. God bless you all.
Would you like to have a purpose?
What you've just heard are Troy's last words that he said on the gurney right before he was killed. And in his final words, he asked his friends, his families, his supporters to continue to pray, to continue to forgive, and to continue to fight this fight. And that's what I'm inviting all of you here today to become a part of, is to fight the fight in all of its manifestations. There's one very specific way here in Utah right now, specifically, that you can fight this fight, because right now, I believe today is the legislative session in Utah ends today, in which there is an attempt to end the death penalty here in Utah. The resolution HB 379, it passed the House committee, and the hope is that it's going to be debated on the House floor. I think today might be the final day that can happen for HB 379 to pass to the next stage. So if you are a Utah voter, call your representative, ask them to support HB 379. Martina and Troy would be really thrilled if you being here and being a part of this talk led to you joining that fight specifically. But of course, the fight is so much wider than Troy and wider than specifically the death penalty. It's how the death penalty is part of an entire system, and how the system in this country is part of larger systems. And so it's a larger question to ask ourselves of how we can continue to fight this fight. Where Danny Glover talked about hope and struggle and resistance in small places, where can we find our part in that struggle? Which small places can we begin in our backyard, in our school, in our communities, in the whole world? And it is all interconnected. I hope you felt the interconnection between what could look like three very separate stories. Arundhati Roy tells us, who's another writer and activist that I admire greatly, she says, "The trouble is, once you see it, you can't unsee it. And once you've seen it, keeping quiet, saying nothing, becomes as political an act as speaking out. There's no innocence. Either way, you're accountable." So what we say, what we do, what we stand for, who we stand with, those are all the choices we have in our form of resistance. But I hope you will choose to speak, to do, to say, to stand. Thank you very, very much for being here. I know I went over a little bit. Do we have time for Q&A for a few questions? And thank you so much. And here's Lynn.
Thank you so much.